So I want to ask you a question. So this is how I felt, but I want to see, am I crazy? So in the scene where she's in the bar, she's talking to wonderful Broadway actress Julie White, who's playing the woman who gave her the Valium. And so she's talking about Phyllis, and she's talking about Phyllis in these loving tones, very hagiographic, as if we already said Phyllis is their goddess. But I also felt that there were some like queer tones there, or is this just me? Is Alice in love with Phyllis or the idea of Phyllis? Julie White, in that, the other woman in that scene, presents herself as a lesbian, as somebody who has lived a long time with a man, and then after her husband died, she basically says, I fell in love with my best friend. And so I was sitting there and I'm like, wow, is Alice coming out with her love for Phyllis? Am I crazy, or am I projecting because we know that, Sarah Paulson is a queer icon and all of that?
I don't think it's projection solely because the conversation is set up in a way that parallels the two situations of love. It'd be different if this was like the woman, Julie White, had not brought up falling in love with her church sister. But, Alice is kind of gushing about Phyllis. And then Julie White goes, I felt the same way. Yeah. I felt the same kind of love in this other person, and this comfort in this other person after my husband passed. And the fact that they were on the same page prior to this woman saying, oh, I'm in now. I think furthers that idea, right? About she didn't put two and two together. This was very natural to her. It's very organic to express her love for Phyllis. She's like, when Phyllis walked in the room, she was just different. And, I couldn't keep my eyes off her. And I just, we became friends after that PTA meeting. And Alice is always at Phyllis's side. And if you watch even earlier episodes of the show, she has this look in her eyes. It's definitely love and reverence. But I also believe that, I believe there's room for that kind of love in those relationships too. I think it could play either way. I think it's up for interpretation.
Obviously, the Alice, it will be completely out of character for her to be like, oh, I'm in love with Phyllis. But I just felt that there is something there. It could be in the performance. It could be in our perception. It could be in the way that they set it up. But it just made the scene more interesting and gave it different shades.
And I also think that it's interesting to point out how maybe Alice doesn't have or didn't have the tools to parse through that love until she was in that space with that woman. Yeah. Or in these spaces with these people who are like, no, I'm in love with another woman. This is the life that I live. And yes, I was married to a man before, and I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. And I think it's interesting that in a conversation with a woman who has lived that life, it allowed her to open up and actually say, actually from the moment I laid eyes on her, I've been obsessed with Phyllis. She changed me. She's the reason I wanted to be a better person. Those are really big things to say about another person, and backs up what we've seen and what we continue to see, because in the end, Alice doesn't ever really quite, they have their little moment in episode 9, but she doesn't ever really quite leave Phyllis's side.
Not really, no. Yeah.